The storm had been raging for 3 days across the Kentucky countryside, turning dirt roads into rivers of mud and forcing everyone indoors. But Sarah Coleman couldn't stay inside any longer. As a veterinary technician at the local animal clinic, she knew that severe weather often meant emergency calls, and she had promised Dr. Martinez she would check on the animals at the abandoned Fairfield farm, a property that had been empty for over 2 years since the previous owner lost it to foreclosure. What Sarah discovered that gray October morning would haunt her dreams and ultimately change not just her life, but the lives of dozens of forgotten souls. The rain pounded against her windshield as she navigated the winding gravel road that led to the old farm. Through the storm, she could barely make out the silhouette of the collapsed barn and broken fencing that had once contained horses, cattle, and dreams that never came true. The property had been left to decay, and local authorities had supposedly removed all the animals months ago. But as Sarah parked her truck near what remained of the main gate, she heard something that made her blood run cold, a sound that seemed to cut through the howling wind and driving rain like a knife through silence. It was crying, not the bleating of goats or the lowing of cattle, but something far more heartbreaking, something that sounded almost human in its grief. Sarah grabbed her medical bag and rain slicker, her boots immediately sinking into the muddy ground as she followed the sound toward the far end of the property. The crying grew louder, more desperate, as she pushed through overgrown weeds and rusted equipment that had been left to rot in the elements. Then she saw him, standing alone in what had once been a pasture, now just a field of mud and broken dreams, was a magnificent bay stallion. But this wasn't the proud, powerful horse that his breed was known for. This was a shadow of what he should have been, his ribs clearly visible through his rain-soaked coat, his head hanging low, and most heartbreakingly of all, tears streaming down his face as he let out the most mournful whinny Sarah had ever heard. Sarah had worked with horses for over 15 years, but she had never seen one actually cry tears of grief. She approached slowly, her heart breaking with every step. The horse didn't run or show fear. He simply stood there, as if he had given up on everything, including hope itself. "Hey there, beautiful boy," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "What are you doing out here all alone?" As she got closer, Sarah could see the full extent of his condition. His hooves were overgrown and cracked. His mane was matted with burrs and mud, and old rope burns around his neck suggested he had been tied up for extended periods. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Eyes filled with a sadness so profound that Sarah felt tears mixing with the rain on her own cheeks. The horse lifted his head slightly when she spoke, and Sarah noticed something that made her gasp. Around his neck hung a faded leather collar with a brass nameplate that read Thunder in weathered letters. But that wasn't what shocked her. It was what was tied to the collar. A small, waterlogged photograph in a plastic bag showed a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with her arms wrapped around the neck of this same horse. Both were smiling in the golden light of what looked like a perfect summer day. On the back of the photo, written in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Thunder and me forever. Love, Annie." Sarah's hands trembled as she realized what she was seeing. This horse hadn't just been abandoned. He had been left behind by someone who loved him, someone who probably had no choice in the matter. And he had been waiting, faithfully standing in this desolate field, crying for a little girl who would never come back. "Oh, Thunder," Sarah whispered, gently touching his rain-soaked neck. "She didn't want to leave you, did she?" At the sound of his name, Thunder's ears perked up for the first time. He turned his head towards Sarah, and she saw something flicker in those sad eyes, a tiny spark of recognition, as if he remembered what it felt like to be loved. Sarah knew she couldn't leave him there. The storm was getting worse, and Thunder was already showing signs of severe malnutrition and exposure. But more than that, she couldn't walk away from grief this profound, this pure. Working quickly, Sarah managed to fashion a makeshift halter from rope in her truck. Thunder offered no resistance as she led him through the mud toward her horse trailer. It was as if he understood that this stranger was his only chance at survival. The drive back to the clinic was treacherous, But Sarah's mind was racing with something beyond the immediate medical needs of her new patient. She had to find out what happened to Annie. Over the following days, as Dr. Martinez worked to restore Thunder's physical health, Sarah began her own investigation. She started with the property records, which led her to the story of the Morrison family. Tom Morrison, his wife Linda, and their daughter Annie. They had owned Fairfield Farm for 12 years before a series of medical bills from Linda's cancer treatment forced them into bankruptcy. Sarah's search led her to a small apartment complex on the other side of town, where she found Linda Morrison working as a night shift nurse at the local hospital. When Sarah introduced herself and mentioned Thunder, Linda broke down completely. "I thought he was gone," Linda sobbed. "The bank said they would find good homes for all the animals." Annie cried for weeks, asking about Thunder every single day. "She made me promise we would get him back when we got back on our feet." Linda explained that Annie, now 11, had been having nightmares about Thunder being alone and scared. She had drawn pictures of him every day since they lost the farm, always with tears in his eyes, as if somehow she knew he was grieving too. "She keeps asking if horses remember people who love them," Linda whispered. I didn't know what to tell her. Sarah smiled through her own tears. "Tell her they remember everything. And tell her Thunder has been waiting for her." What happened next was something straight out of fairy tale, but it was beautifully, impossibly real. Sarah arranged for Annie to visit Thunder at the clinic, but she didn't tell the little girl why she was really there. She simply said there was a horse who needed some cheering up, and maybe Annie could help. The moment Annie walked into the recovery stall, Thunder's transformation was miraculous. His head shot up, his ears pricked forward, and he let out a whinny of pure joy that echoed through the entire clinic. But it was Annie's reaction that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Thunder," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "Thunder." She ran to him, wrapping her small arms around his neck as he gently lowered his head to nuzzle her hair. Both were crying, tears of joy this time, as they held each other for the first time in over 2 years. "I'm so sorry," Annie sobbed into his mane. "I'm so sorry I couldn't take you with me. I never stopped thinking about you. Not even for one day." Dr. Martinez later said he had never seen such an instant healing response in an animal. Thunder's appetite returned immediately, his posture straightened, and within hours he looked like a completely different horse. But the real miracle was yet to come. Sarah had been working behind the scenes with the local community, sharing Thunder and Annie's story on social media. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from across the country, enough to cover all of Thunder's medical bills and more. A local horse boarding facility offered free lifetime care for Thunder. A feed store donated a year's worth of supplies. Most importantly, a wealthy rancher who had heard the story came forward with an offer that left everyone speechless. He wanted to give a Morrison family a small house on his property, rent-free, with the understanding that Annie and Thunder would never be separated again. 6 months later, Sarah visited the ranch where Thunder now lives in a beautiful pasture, healthy and content. But the most incredible sight was seeing Annie and Thunder together every day after school, making up for lost time. Annie had started a blog called Thunder's Tears, where she shared their story and raised money for other abandoned horses. To date, her efforts have helped rescue over 50 horses from similar situations. "Thunder taught me that love doesn't have a time limit," Annie wrote in one of her posts. "Even when everything seems hopeless, love remembers. Love waits. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, love gets a second chance." Thunder still wears the collar with Annie's childhood photo, but now it's joined by dozens of new pictures, images of birthday parties, trail rides, and quiet moments in the pasture where a horse and his girl are finally home. Sarah visits them often, and she never fails to be amazed by the bond between them. Thunder follows Annie everywhere, protective and gentle, as if he's making up for every moment they were apart. "People ask me if horses can really cry," Sarah often tells visitors to the ranch. "After seeing Thunder, I know they can. But more importantly, I know they can heal. Sometimes the most broken hearts just need to remember they were always capable of love. Because in the end, that's what Thunder's tears were really about. Not just grief for what was lost, but hope for what could still be found." If this story of unbreakable love touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories that prove love never truly dies.